everyone, this is Jia Yu from the Institute of New Structural Economics at Peking University, and I am responsible for the application of new structural economics to the international investment practice. And previously, I worked more than 8 years for a state power investment corporation, and I am responsible for the overseas investment and focus on energy and mining field. And I'm also doing some global resources market research, China's outward OFDI policy, and empirical studies at a macro level. And before joining State Power Investment Corporation, I started my career as a consultant for the utility industry with Accenture. And regarding to my graduation background, I am graduated from Peking University with a double major in French and economics and received a scholarship from the French government to continue my studies in France. And I have obtained 2 master's degrees in development economics and project management at CERDI CNRS in France. And I also received my PhD in development economics there. And my research fields focus on Chinese Go Global empirical studies, industrial park, and special economic zone diagnosis, as well as China's overseas investment and the interaction of the manufacturing, energy, and the mining sector, and their roles in the process of industrialization for Belt and Road countries. So today I'm also the consultant of Asian Development Bank, and I was the first representative of the People's Republic of China accepted onto the Future Energy Leader program by the World Energy Council. I am a FILE Global Board member and a key member of the Development Committee from 2015 to 2017. Yeah, and regarding to my academic publication, here listed some of my academic publications. The content includes such as the China's FDI, Belt and Road Initiatives, SDG, BRICS countries, and Africa's industrialization, the practice of new structural economics in developing countries, and the global economic governance, etc. And regarding here are the PPT just showing the structure of our institute. We have always 2 tracks, knowing track and achieving track. So under the knowing track is our academic research and teaching team. We have 3 departments under the achieving track. You can see here, domestic team and international team, and also enterprise development team, which is in charge of the training program target for enterprises. Now we will see the PPT 5. So the motto of INSEE is we are a think plus do tank. That means we are academically rigorous, action-oriented, and policy-focused. So this course is about the practice of new structural regional economics in developing economies. And the outline includes 5 sections. In the section 1 is China's development experience and overseas foreign direct investment. The section 2 is about the commonness and the new trends of developing countries. Section 3 is the industrialization of developing countries with special economic zones. And following the section 4 is about our methodology. The name is Growth Identification and Facilitation Framework. Finally, the section 5 is about the GIF model in practice and the different case studies of our projects, including Nigeria, Benin, and Uzbekistan. Okay, this number just showed the China's economic achievement. In 1978, China was one of the poorest countries in the world with a per capita GDP of only $156 US. That means it's only 1/3 of the average per capita GDP of sub-Saharan African countries at that time. And in 2017, China's per capita GDP reached $9,400 US, and China was becoming an upper middle income country. Since 1978, 700 million Chinese have been lifted out of poverty. So during the past 39 years, from 1978 to 2017, the average annual growth rate of the Chinese economy was 9.5%. And in 2009, its economy scale exceeded Japan for the first time and became the second largest economy in the world. And from 1978 to 2017, the average annual growth of China's import and export trade reached 14.5%. In 1978, the proportion of total trade value in GDP was only 9.7%, and now it has exceeded 30%. In 2010, China's total export exceeded that of Germany and became the world's largest exporter. About 95% of its exports are manufactured goods, hence known internationally as a world factory and a global manufacturing base. By 2025, China is forecasted to become a high-income nation with a per capita GDP of US $12,000. And here, this figure just shows the China's total GDP. We can see that there is acceleration from the year 2000, and China surpassed Germany in 2007 and surpassed Japan in 2010, and possibly will surpass US around 2025. And in terms of China's per capita revenue, today it is more than $10,000, and we are approaching the high-income countries. And today, China has been the world's largest exporter of goods since 2009. In 2017, China exported $22.63 trillion of goods. And since 2013, China has also secured the position of the largest trading nation in the world. So this position was previously held by the United States. And here we can see from the 6th to 12th five-year plan, the actual targets have all been achieved. In terms of the 13th five-year plan, due to the pandemic, it will be below our expectation. And in this figure, there are several different colors line. The green line represents the contribution of industry sector to the GDP growth. It took a dominated place for quite a long period after the year 1990. However, a tipping point is appearing in the year 2013. It is the first time that the service sector was surpassing the industry sector and became the biggest contribution to China's GDP. Today, the tertiary sector contributes more than a half of China's GDP. So now, how to explain China's economic miracle? According to our Dean, Professor Justin E. Fulin, there are four explanations. One, a facilitating government. The second, an effective market. And the third point is a dynamic entrepreneurship. And finally, a continuous innovations. And in terms of dynamic entrepreneurship, in particular in China, now the private sector enterprises have been keen to the Chinese economic development, contributing more than 50% of tax revenue, more than 60% of GDP, 70% of innovation products, and more than 80% of total employment, more than 90% of new jobs. So today, the private sector in China are very active and competitive. And here is the summary of China's development experience. One, the premise of China's economic development is the improvement of labor productivity that depends on technological innovation and industrial upgrading. According to the new structural economics theory pioneered by Professor Justin E. Fulin, the realization of technological innovation and industrial upgrading requires the synergies between an effective market and a facilitating government. That is a gradual reform path in which government intervention is parallel to market opening. Second, an effective market guides entrepreneurs to choose the technology and industry according to the comparative advantage of national factor endowments, so that comparative advantage gradually shift from labor or natural resources intensive to capital intensive sector. A facilitating government should correct market dysfunctions, improve the construction of both hard and soft infrastructure, and provide compensation of externalities for technological innovation and industrial upgrading. Third, putting into practice the effective market and the facilitating government, China set up special economic zones, processing export zones, and industrial parks in response to the problem of poor business environment in the early stages of reform and opening up policy. Improvements of infrastructure and business environment were achieved in these zones and parks. Thereby, industries with comparative advantage were able to develop rapidly, changing their comparative advantage to competitive advantages, occupying domestic and international markets, and accumulating capital, which all in all boosted the industrial upgrading. And last, with the further development of China's economy and industrial upgrading, coupled with rising labor costs, labor-intensive industries are gradually losing their comparative advantage and will face pressure from industrial transfer. Since the Industrial Revolution, similar transfers have occurred many times, creating a window of opportunity for industrialization and modernization for countries that receive the industrial transfer. Developing countries that could seize this window of opportunity will be able to achieve rapid development in the next 2 to 3 decades, get rid of poverty, and become a newly industrialized economy. And here, this figure just shows the ODI from the year 1982 to 2018. We can see from the figure that in the year 2016, the gap between the outward and the inward FDI widened by $62.4 billion due to China's substantial increase in its investments to countries involved in the Belt and Road Initiative. However, the gap narrowed in 2017 mainly due to the restrictions of China's overseas investment in non-productive assets such as real estate, entertainment, and also due to the increased screening of foreign investment. And this figure just shows China's FDI stock and by the Heritage Foundation. We can see that from the year 2005 to 2011, the total China's OFDI is about $443 billion. And in terms of sector distribution, energy sector is the biggest sector that attracts the most of Chinese investment with the amount of $172 billion. And the mining sector is the second biggest sector with $85 billion. And the third biggest sector is about transportation. And this figure just shows the same China's outward FDI stock from the 2005 to 2014. Just 3 years later, we can see the change. Now, the total investment just doubled from $443 billion to $870 billion. And as always, the energy sector is always the biggest one with almost $400 billion. The transportation is the second biggest sector with the amount of $134 billion, while the mining sector became the third biggest with $124 billion. And how about today? Here we will see the most updated statistics. Just after the Belt and Road Initiative, we can see that today, the total Chinese overseas investment is more than $2 trillion. And in terms of the sector distribution, energy is always the biggest sector with the percentage of 36%, and transportation 19%, mining 9%, real estate 9%. And now we will see from the academic point of view, there are 5 major driving forces of foreign direct investment. The first one is about resources seeking. Here it's very easy to understand about resources seeking, especially for China. During the past 40 years, we have constructed many infrastructures, roads, buildings, etc. So we need a lot of raw materials. And for some raw materials that China has itself, it's very easy to use. However, we still need more materials that China doesn't have enough. So the first thing is to buy from others. That means import from other countries. However, since Chinese market is so big, so when Chinese buy something, the price will increase a lot. Therefore, in order to avoid the international price risk, the Chinese companies prefer investing directly rather than importing from other countries. So that motivation is resources seeking motivation. And the second motivation is market seeking. So here I will just give an example. For example, myself, I am a producer, a garment or shoe producer in China. And every year I produce many shoes and trousers and clothes. And I also sell my products not only into the Chinese domestic market, but also export to other markets like US or European markets. However, today, due to the labor costs in China and some trade barriers with international market, so my cost increased a lot. So since my market is in US or in European, so I will think to find somewhere with cheaper, for example, with the trade preferential agreement, for example, African countries, because among African countries with US, they have AGOA trade preferential agreement. That means export the made in Africa products. If you export to US, you can enjoy 0 custom tariff. So why not I move from China to Africa? So that motivation is the market seeking motivation. And the third one is efficiency seeking. I will continue my example. And maybe you know, in China, especially 10 years ago, the labor cost increased a lot. And for the labor intensive sectors, such as garment, shoe making, etc., the production cost increased also as well. So I want to find somewhere with cheaper labor cost or cheaper natural resources cost. And why? So that's why also I move from China to like Southeast Asian countries or African countries. So that motivation, the purpose is to the cost saving. So that motivation is about efficiency seeking motivation. The next one is about agglomeration effect. I will continue this example. And now, face to me, I have very high custom tariff. Also, I have the labor cost also very high. So finally, I decide to move to other countries. However, since it is the first time I make this decision, so frankly speaking, I do not know where to go. The first thing is I will look at the others, the other friends who work in this field. And if they all go invest in these countries, maybe that means these countries have very good environment of investment. So I will go as well. So with more and more investors move to one country, and in that country, it will create an agglomeration effect. Finally, it's about institution. It is also very easy to understand. a country with good governance, with transparency, will of course attract the investors. So these 5 motivation or driving forces is the major consideration for foreign direct investment decision. And now we will see in the real world what are the biggest motivation for foreign direct investment. And from this figure, we can see that the first 4 biggest motivation is all market seeking related. For example, the size of local market, the growth market, the presence of suppliers and partners, and access to international and regional market. All these 4 biggest motivation is all market seeking motivation. And for example, the cheaper labor is the number 8 motivation. And the access to natural resources is not even among the first 10 motivation. And now let's focus on the Chinese investment. Here we can see the statistics by the EIU, and they are listed the top 10 most attractive countries and regions for Chinese enterprises. And here, for example, we can see something very interesting, that at the overall level, apart from Malaysia, Chile, and Russia, the other economies are all the developed economy. So in general, the Chinese companies prefer investing in developed economy. And here we just find some other statistics focus on the spatial sectors. And this table just shows the natural resources sector. We will see the countries like Russia, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, Australia, etc. And there are 2 kinds of countries. One is petrol resources rich countries, such as Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, etc. And the other kind of countries is mining, very rich in mining resources. And here this table just shows the China's preferential investment countries and regions focus on agriculture, industry, and services. And we can see in agriculture sector, it's a mix of both developed economy, such as US, and also the developing economy. And for the industry sector, we have also 2 kinds of countries. One is like Angola, like Saudi Arabia. It is more related to heavy industry because all these countries are very rich in natural resources. And also for a country like India, like Vietnam, like Indonesia or Pakistan, it's more about the light industry. That means the manufacturing industry, because the labor costs there and also the preferential trade agreement in those countries are very competitive. And for the financial sector, of course, it's all the developed economy. And here, this table just shows the China's preferential investment countries and regions focus on industries. And we have the automotive industry, consumer goods, energy, financial, healthcare, telecommunications, etc. Here, we really want to find one country very interesting, that is Vietnam. We can see that from the table, Vietnam is very attractive in automotive, consumer goods, and energy sector as well. So today, more and more developing countries become very attractive and competitive. I will explain the reason in the next session. And let's see what is the commonness and characteristics for developing countries. Thank you.